This is Ross Coulthard, and you are listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. My name is Andy, and I am joined by renowned researcher and author of many books on the UFO subject and host of his own YouTube show and podcast, the Paranormal UFO Consciousness Podcast, Mr. Grant Cameron. Grant, welcome back.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for having me back. I appreciate it.
It's been too long, and that's definitely my fault, Grant. Got a lot to get through. You're a popular guest, as many of the guests are, but loads of stuff come in for you across the whole of the UFO topic as well. So the questions from listeners go all over. What's prompted me getting yourself back on now is you had a book come out in June, and that was, let me get the title correct, Beyond Managing Magic, Tangled in Secrets. It's the third in a series of what's going to be 5 books. The previous to this was back in 2017 that you released as well, and that was the book 2 was Managing Magic, the government's UFO disclosure plan. Before that, you had UFOs, Area 51, and government informants. And books 4 and 5 are Managing Magic, Volume 3, and Drip Drip, the Core Secret, which aren't released just yet, and we'll get to all of those. But first off, so the book we're going to talk about, Beyond Managing Magic, what's the thinking and timing behind releasing that now?
It was actually done in 2018. I wrote Managing Magic, and the idea behind Managing Magic was I've always believed that there is an element to the control group, whoever is running this show, that they sort of want people acclimatized. So they try to release, or no, I guess the word would be, Bigelow used the word confirmation rather than disclosure. You'll hear a lot of them say, I'm not for disclosure, but I'm for confirmation. And that's this whole idea that a lot of the people who control this have got money invested in this, whether it be Lockheed or whoever it is. Bigelow talks about this, proprietary. If we put money in this, we own this. We're not going to give it back to the government and let people file patents on it and this sort of thing. But the idea behind Managing Magic was that, and I came to this conclusion 2012, and others have started to come to the conclusion that it's not just UFOs, it's magic. It's in fact, Ron Pandolfi, one of the high-level officials that I've always chased probably for 20 years, said, we have a phenomenology problem. And he said, because we cannot control, or I'm pretty sure he said it. I sent it to his friend, Dan Smith. I said, would this have been high-level intelligence wrote this? And he said, maybe. And he goes, because we cannot control the phenomena, we watch those that the phenomena affects. Lights in the sky have no usable information. And then it talks about contactees. And perhaps we have beings as well, however defined. And this is this whole idea that it was once referred to as the core story, that we're being interacted by some sort of intelligence. We've got hardware and bodies, but other than that, we haven't got a clue. We can't back engineer this. So we're having this difficult problem in what to do. So it's this thing about managing magic. So this book was done in 2018. It was finished. And then what happened was that was when the Wilson Leak document was given to me. And that really sort of flipped my life upside down. And the alien autopsy document, which I think is a more important document than the Wilson Leak document. But anyway, I was given that document. And then I said, well, when I talked to James in Australia, who had the document, who got this sort of vision in the middle of the night and phoned his wife in Australia and said, you need to fax me this document immediately. I'm going to show it to Grant Cameron. And the idea was that I was going to release it. So the idea was I was going to put it at the end of the book. So the book was sort of done, and it sort of goes into this idea again of this idea that there are people who are trying to get the story out in terms of acclimatization. And they had this all, I had this all set up. And what I basically look at is the Tom DeLonge story. And I've differed from everybody on the Tom DeLonge story. Everybody always describes it as Tom DeLonge went and got all these guys together, and he, put all these guys into a group, and then he put out his material, his books, and formed To the Stars Academy. And no, that's not what happened. What happened was he talked to somebody in Lockheed somebody whose relative worked in Lockheed, and he started asking this guy questions. Then this guy phones him back, and he says, would you like to introduce the president of Lockheed Skunk Works? We're having a barbecue outside Lockheed Skunk Works. The families can't go in the building, but this is to sort of a barbecue for the families. And he said, sure, if I can get 5 minutes with the guy. So he introduces Robert Weiss at this barbecue, and then he gets his 5 minutes. He doesn't mention UFOs, and he said, I've got a proposition for you. And they bring him into a skiff. That's when it all starts. So Lockheed brings him in there. The head scientist is there. There's another guy who I'm not sure who it was. And then there's Robert Weiss comes in halfway through the conversation when they're confronting Tom DeLonge about his website that he used to run, which was a real conspiracy website. It was like, it made the National Enquirer look like very tame. It was just horrible stories of conspiracies and QAnon type stuff. This is 2012, 2013. So they're confronting Tom DeLonge about what's with the website, like what's this deal, you know? And then he's trying to explain it, and then Weiss comes in and he said, "Oh, you just saved me here." And so they start talking, and he makes the proposition: "You guys can't get this secret out. You're trying to get the story out. You can't do it. I've got all these Instagram, Facebook followers, Twitter followers. I can get the message out for you." And they look at each other and they go, "Maybe this will work." And that's when it all starts. Then they send him to Washington. If you know the story, it's in the book, where they send him to Washington and he meets these two guys outside Pentagon City. And Pentagon City is where the big meeting took place with Leslie Kean, with Jim Semivan, with Lou Elizondo. Elizondo resigns in the morning. In the afternoon, New York Times is there. This meeting is planned, and all these intelligence people. And there's a contractor in the room, which I'm not sure who the contractor was. And this whole program starts where they're going to sort of drop this secret. So that's how the Tom DeLonge thing starts. He goes to Pentagon City. There's two guys sitting behind a desk, and they say, and one of them was from the Lockheed skiff. He said, this kind of stuff does not happen in the White House. It does not happen on the Hill. It happens when guys like us decide to take the football and move it down the field. And they send him to NASA. And then NASA sends them to Ames, and then Ames sends them to the general, which is probably McKay in Colorado Springs. And he starts getting all these people that join on board. And that's a big difference, because people will say the government is covering up. And for example, Chris Mellon will say, no, there isn't. And Grant is wrong. There is no just drip disclosure thing. They are not dropping stuff. They sure are dropping stuff, because when Tom DeLonge talked to these guys, Robert Weiss was operational. McCaslin was operational, and so was McKay. They were in the government, and they were talking to him about UFOs, which means, yes, there are people in the government. And I know, because I worked at a university, which in Canada is funded by the government. And I know for a fact, because we had a situation where if you are not public affairs, you are not allowed to talk to the press. There's no way. I cannot go and say, I work on UFOs, and I'm at the University of Manitoba. They don't want UFOs associated with the University of Manitoba. You are not allowed to talk. And there's actually one incident where my boss, there was a confrontation with one of my employees, and the newspaper at the university picked it up. And I told my boss they want an interview. And he said, yeah, sure, send him down. He was a real sort of had a big ego, a real psychopath type guy who believed he could talk anybody into anything. He said, sure, send him by. And I said, send him by. So we go to the office, and this woman pulls out her tape recorder. And she says to him, can I tape? And I'm looking at him like, no, don't let her tape. And then he says, sure, yeah. And he tells his story. And then at the end, he says, oh, I guess we got this all solved now, you know. And she says, yeah, I know, I understand what's going on. He said, well, I guess you're just going to drop it now. And she says, well, no, I have to talk to my editor. And then 5 minutes later, I go back to the other side of campus. 5 minutes later, my boss phones me up and he says, we're going to get fired. I'm not supposed to give the interview. And I said, we're going to get fired? You're the one that offered to do the interview. And it's like, they're going to run with the story. And luckily, this guy was from Croatia. And the guy who sponsored me into the country was the public affairs guys at the University of Manitoba. So that guy talked the university paper into dropping the story. But that's the whole deal. You cannot speak on behalf of the government if you are not authorized to speak. So that's the key to the whole thing, is it sort of goes through that Tom DeLonge thing. And it sort of shows that there is this backdoor effort in order to get the story out.
One of the keys for me, and I maybe asked you this when you first came on, I think in 2022, Grant, I'm a big fan of Tom DeLonge. Blink-182, soundtrack to my youth. I'm wearing, Monsters in California hoodie just now. We'll get to that. why Tom DeLonge? If back then you conjure images of Tom DeLonge and if you Googled him back in the day, you saw a guy running bare ass down a street in his music videos.
Yep.
He was swearing. He was an American Pie. He was a bit goofy. And strange voice. Just a bit geeky, a bit of a weird guy. Why was this the guy to stand in front of all of those core secret keepers and for them to go, this is the guy? Was it that he was the first with that kind of pull? What happened?
The idea goes back to plausible deniability. If you go back, I wrote the book UFOs, Area 51 and Government Informants. That was the whole story. We were writing MUFON. The first book of MUFON ever published was the book that we did on Area 51. And it's been redone. It's called UFOs, Area 51 and Government Informants now. And we were following the Bob Lazar story as it was happening. And the Bob Lazar story, the way that happened was that John Lear told me this story, and then it was confirmed later on. And that was that when Lazar met Teller at Los Alamos, he made an application for a job. They phoned him up and they brought him into EG&G, which runs Area 51. And the first question in the second interview to get on the base was, what's your relationship to John Lear and what do you think about him? So before Bob Lazar ever went on Area 51, they knew that he knew John Lear. Now, John Lear was a crazy man. John Lear was a very powerful guy. He had 125 licenses for different planes. He'd flown for the CIA. He'd run for state senator and stuff. He was very, very famous, but everybody at the field knew this guy was off. He was off the wall. I mean, it was just like underground bases and alien shootouts and stuff like this. And he just ran with anything that was very highly controversial. In 1989, John Lear, this is where Bill Moore makes the famous speech where he describes the fact that he was involved with the government. At the same time, John Lear was running that conference, and he was pulled off the conference because he wanted to bring in Bill Cooper and all these like really sort of QAnon type people into the thing and said, no, we're not going to have that MUFON conference. Not going to do that. So John Lear ran his own conference. People don't realize this. MUFON had a conference in 89 in Las Vegas, and John Lear had a conference down the street, and John Lear dragged in more people than MUFON did. So there's this controversial thing where Lazar goes in and they say to him, what's your relationship to John Lear? So they're tying it in. And Lazar, like Tom DeLonge, had a bad background. So they already knew if they had his bio, they would have known that he didn't have 2 degrees. He was claiming he had 2 master's degrees, which he didn't have. He was raised. He had a pirate flag above his house. He had this jet engine car. He was like, with this, he was doing the prostitution thing. He had this really bad background. So that's what you do is if you want the story out, and people say, well, they would disclose. If you want to disclose, you stand the president up, you bring in all the news people, and you bring them to the base, and you show them the bodies, you show them the crafts, you make the disclosure. That's not what they're doing. They're not disclosing. They're sort of disclosing. They've got this plausible deniability. They don't spill the milk. They put it out there, and then you can pull it back. So that's exactly what happened with Bob Lazar. Bob Lazar had these interviews in November of 1988. He was on the base December the 6th. He was on the base in 2 weeks. This is like a top secret code word program, the most highly classified program in the United States. He's on the base in a couple of weeks. This takes 6 months to get one of these clearances. So they put him on the base, and then John Lear tells the story. He's on the base, and the second day they actually sit him down and they give him 125 documents to read as to what the program, Looking Glass, all these different programs and stuff like that. And I know as somebody who trained people at the university, the second day someone's on your staff, you do not take them and show them all the top secret stuff and explain. It's a need to know program. You need a program access for this and that and this sort of stuff. You're not going to put them down. So they're feeding them this material. And one of the stories they fed them was the story that was the Dulce Base story. The Dulce Base story about the underground base where 64 special forces guys are killed. They're armed, and the Greys say you're not supposed to be armed and stuff. One of the stories that Lazar read was that story, except it happened under Area 51. So you take the same story, they put it out again in a different form, and he goes to as soon as he sits in the craft, almost right from the word go, they put him and sit him in the craft. He goes back to John Lear. John Lear tells the story. I'm sitting in my office. I'm writing checks. And Lazar comes in and he says, I was on the base. He said, you were? And he said, yeah. He said, what, is it true? Is it, yeah. Is it their stuff? Is it our stuff? And he said, it's theirs. And then he goes, what are you doing in my office? You know, they're going to be watching. You get the heck out of here. And they go into the back of Lazar's or Lear's house. And they're, you know, so they can't be, because he said the house is going to be monitored. They go out into the back and he says, you go back to the base, go back for 6 months. Then come tell me what's going on. Don't tell me now. And that's the whole thing. So when the thing exploded, when they put him on as Dennis and they put him backlit and all this sort of stuff, Lazar was actually taken to Indian Springs. He tells the story. He goes to Indian Springs, and what they do is they put a gun to his head because he took out the guys to the base. And I actually have an audio tape with John Lear the morning after they got caught on the base, because I was dealing with the whole story with Knapp and all these guys as the Area 51 story was breaking. And so he took John Lear out there, and Bob Lazar's wife went, and Gene Huff went there, and they went there, and he was showing them the test. And the reason he was showing them the test, because he only was on the base a couple of times. If you take a look at his W-2 form, it only has $800. That's because he was never on the base. And he was frustrated because they weren't calling him to Area 51 to work. And so he got frustrated, and he knew where the test was, and he was telling these guys where the test was. So when he gets debriefed after he gets caught, they take him to Indian Springs the next morning instead of Area 51. They put a gun to his head and they said, when we told you this was top secret, that didn't mean to tell all your friends what was going on. But what do? They let him go. They didn't arrest him. They didn't penalize him. And a couple of weeks later, they call him back to the base. And it was actually Bob Lazar who refused to go back to the base because he remembered being given this stuff that he had to drink, this very terrible stuff they had to drink, and he couldn't remember what had happened on the base when he did that. And he figured, if I go on the base, I'll never come back off the base again. So he's the guy that turned it down. They didn't fire him. They did not fire him after that incident of releasing this top secret stuff. So they wanted him to go out. They wanted him to show the test. They wanted him to tell this story. And when it all fell apart, it was like, oh yeah, that's Bob Lazar. Come on, that's Bob Lazar. And people don't realize that. So Bob Lazar went on the base in December of 1988. And it wasn't until the story broke in May, I think it was May of 1989, John Lear was telling the story. He said, I got this guy up at Area 51 and there's got UFOs up there. But because it was John Lear telling the story, everybody said, yeah, it's John Lear. Come on, John Lear. You don't believe anything John Lear says. Come on, forget it. And so the story's out there. That's what they want. They want the story out there, but nobody can confirm the story. Nobody really believes it. You're saying it's real. I'm saying it's not real. And everybody's having these fights, all the UFO researchers, and that's what they want. They sort of want it leaking out. And so what happened was George Knapp was missing a guest. If you know the story, he was missing a guest one day. And that's when he says to Lear, he says, hey, you got that guy you set up at Area 51, said he's working on flying saucers. I need a guest tonight. Bring him on. Then they bring him on. They backlit him and they called him Dennis. And then suddenly it's no longer crazy John Lear telling the story. Now it's George Knapp, 22 Emmy Award winning, journalist. And suddenly the thing goes viral around the world. Everybody in the world is talking Area 51. And there's all these crews coming in. They're trying to interview everybody and trying to figure out what's going on. And there's a guy by the name of Billy Goodman, who had a big radio station in Las Vegas at the time, who was broadcasting the story. He starts bringing these buses. Friday and Saturday night, he's hiring these buses, and there's like 2 buses, and they're going up to the mountain, and they're looking down, and now the whole thing has just gone bad. It's sort of like even George Knapp described the fact. If you said this is counterintelligence, it really didn't work very well, because suddenly you've got everybody up and they're looking down at the base, and they can see everything that's going on. People got cameras and stuff, and that's when Bill Clinton went in and took more land so that everybody couldn't go 11 miles away and look at the base. They were 25 miles away, and they could no longer see the base. It all backfired. Then they got it all back under control again, and the story sort of faded away. And that's what they want. That's what they're doing. They're leaking the story, but it's plausible deniability, and so you'll give it to people like Bob Lazar, you'll give it to John Lear, you'll give it to Tom DeLonge. So that's what you want. You want a crazy guy carrying the story. If you want the real story out, go give it to one of the people from the New York Times, or give them the photographs and confirm the whole thing. That's what they want. They want this story sort of out there where nobody can really confirm or deny it, and the stories are floating around. And if you get a good story, if you get a good story, what they do, Semivan described this to Chris Bledsoe. Chris Bledsoe was afraid that, he was going to get killed and his kids were being harassed and stuff. He said, if we wanted you dead, you would have been dead 10 years ago. We don't do that stuff anymore. What they do now, my contention, is if you got a good story, Andy, and it's on the mark, What they're going to do is put a second guy in who's going to tell a similar story, and suddenly it's like, was Andy telling the truth? This person telling the truth? And nobody knows what's going on. They throw mud in the water. That's all they're doing. And they sort of disinform people. And so a lot of the stuff that's appearing is them leaking stuff to control the information. They can't kill the guy, because if they kill the guy, it confirms it's for real. So that's what I believe they're doing. And that's why I call it managing magic. They're managing not only the UFO story, but the story that you get from Skinwalker Ranch. That the reason they went to Skinwalker Ranch was not for UFOs. It was because they put 4 bulls inside a trailer, through a locked trailer. It's because the woman took her groceries in, and she went to the next room, came back, and the groceries are back in the bag. And there was portals and stuff like that. And that's what they wanted to figure out, is like, what's all this weird stuff? Boy, if we could get this, go inside people's heads, put bulls through trailers, lock trailers through metal and stuff like that. Man, if we could get this, man, we would. So it's not just UFOs, it's all this paranormal phenomena. And they know it's all connected. They know it's all the same thing.
By putting that story out there and just allowing it to be public, I don't see an issue with that in 2024, because if you look at anything, just regardless of what you think of it, COVID, for example, there was so much opinion around it when it came out, and there still is now. And it doesn't seem to matter who puts out what information. There are different camps all over the place believing what they want anyway. You can look at the US election, the Trump assassination. There are so many divided camps that are just going to believe their own story, that you don't have to, like you say, kill people anymore or bump them off, because you just put out alternative narratives, don't you? And that controls what's being said. But I wonder, is part of the reason the truth is out there in some way, shape, or form, so the story can be confirmed or validated down the line? Or do you think it's out there to be watered down enough that it stays out of view, out of sight, out of mind?
Well, both. I think the story they have put out, I mean, the story I maintain is the fact, and I've just put these documents out on the internet. There was actually a study done for President Johnson, and I got a hold of this study. And James McDonald, who was a big researcher at the time, was a friend of Johnson, and he was putting great pressure on the president to do a UFO study. The conclusion to that study was, yeah, UFOs are real, they're metal, they're solid objects and stuff like that. Other than that, we really don't know what's going on. That's exactly what Obama said. We have these photographs, we have this stuff, but we really don't know what's going on. And if you listen to the last interview that Jim Semivan does, and I say Jim Semivan is this guy, he's an equivalent to a 2-star general in the CIA, very highly powerful guy. I was told he was briefed by Ron Pandolfi when he left. He actually claims he knows where the legacy programs are and a little bit about the communication program and stuff like that, but he's not going to talk about it. And if you listen to him, you basically get this story that the problem you have is, if you put the president up here, you say, well, I'm going to answer the question. Yeah, UFOs are real. Yeah, we got hardware. It's never going to stop there. It's like a million questions are about to go, and nobody's going to be satisfied. So it's going to keep going on. And one of the things that he said in this latest interview, he said, how does just to paraphrase him, how does the president tell everybody that they're immaterial? And this is this whole idea is, if it actually is what I say it is, it's a game. It's the theory of wow. It's the aliens aren't doing anything. They're etheric beings taking on bodies. They're pretending to be aliens. And it's this whole thing. What are we really dealing with here? And even Jim Semivan says that, because people will say, no, Grant, come on, it's extraterrestrial. Come on, it's extraterrestrial. And Semivan, remember he's got the briefing. He said, he says, because you've got bodies and crafts doesn't mean you know what you're dealing with. And that's the whole thing. What are we really dealing with? And if you go to the high levels, that's why they're all keep denying extraterrestrial. We have no evidence of extraterrestrial. They actually have evidence of bodies and hardware, but in the end, they really don't know what this is, because unless the thing's got, and most aliens don't wear clothes. So, I mean, unless it's got pockets and it's got a driver's license from Zeta Reticuli, how do you know what you're dealing with? And so that's what the whole deal is. You don't want to put the president out there, because you can't answer like 99% of the questions. This thing is beyond anything. Even when we went back, when we did the first book, UFOs, Area 51 and Government Informants, that whole book was about Dr. Eric Walker. He was the highest level source that anybody's ever had, I maintain, other than Eric Davis talking to the 2 different presidents about the Holloman Air Force Base story. Other than that, Walker was the highest level guy. He was working with Vannevar Bush to do national security policy in 1947. And when we contacted him, he said, leave it alone. There's nothing you can do about it. You're up against the windmills. And he would keep insisting this whole thing, unless you have the mind of Einstein, you are not going to get anywhere on this thing. And it wasn't until 20 years later I suddenly realized that this guy was actually telling us the truth through rhymes and riddles. He would say, what do you know about ESP? Unless you know about ESP and how it works, you will not be taken in. And now you hear Lakatsky saying that in his interview, and he's sort of leaking stuff out. He said, if we've discovered that the phenomena or the technology is a combination of physical and psychic material. And that's this whole thing where I did in the alien UFO sky pilots, this idea that people fly the craft with their mind. Now they know this. How do you bring this across to the people? Well, they're using your mind, the craft, you go inside your mind and you can go on the other side of the galaxy instantaneously. They're trying to figure it out because it's all this thing of I call it the boys and their toys. They're not interested in the spiritual applications of what this might be or who these are. They're just interested in faster cars, more powerful AR-15 rifles, faster way to kill your enemy with bombs and stuff like that. That's what it's about. It's about this technology thing, which they really aren't really getting anywhere in terms of the whole game. So, but they're still trying to get the story out, and you'll see. I say the two interviews you got to watch is you got to watch Jim Semivan very closely because he is in the know, and Lakatsky dropped a bunch of stuff in his last interview, unbelievable, where he confirms, like for example, he confirms the Men in Black, which I've always said the same thing. I say it's theory of wow. What's the UFO doing? It's not doing anything. It's just wants you to go, wow, what is going on? You start looking and you start realizing reality is not the way you think it is. Nuts and bolts, it's not what you think it is. And he confirms that the Men in Black are real. And of course, everybody always says, oh, the Men in Black, they're trying to kill me. There's helicopters on my house and stuff like that. And to me, it was always the same thing. How do they know? How does it come and know when you have an experience? And they're there the next morning with a helicopter. And so Lakatsky actually puts out the fact. He said, but is it reverse psychology? And this is the theory of wow. Are they actually dragging you into it? You go, oh my goodness, there was this woman came to my door and she was doing a survey and she had a wig on, but it was on sideways. And it's like, it's the weirdest thing in the world. It's like, what was going on? And that's what they're doing. They're doing this weird thing where they're gradually releasing it. And there's a lot of people know. There's a lot of people in government. People say, the government, it's illegal. They got to get it. I say, no, it's absolutely legal. It's absolutely legal. We have bought the farm on this thing. We have built this whole story of national security, $900 billion defense budget and stuff like that. Because Lakatsky tells the story and everybody misses it. We have this not 8-second attention span. If you look it up, we have 8-second attention span on the internet. Lakatsky tells this story. I'm in 2011. I'm in a congressional facility. And there's a senator with me who was Reed. Reed was there. And there was an undersecretary of defense, which means that's executive branch. So there was the executive branch and the legislative branch were in that meeting. And he said it was a long meeting. I can only talk about the first part. We had a craft and we were inside the craft, which means that Reed knew they had hardware. And when the New York Times came out, at first they said, oh, Reed said there was hardware. And then he says, withdraw that. It's a lie. I never said that. And he starts backing off because he realizes this is national security. And he's just, violated national security. And if you even go back to look at the whole story of how this developed in 2009, in the book that you're talking about now, this Beyond Managing Magic, I tell the story in 2009. The reason the OSAP program ended up dying is because in 2009, Reed got all the money and he got these other senators to work. They got the $22 million. They were running the program. And then in 2009, you say, oh, Reed was this guy. He was in favor of disclosure. No, he wasn't in favor of disclosure. He was in favor of covering this thing up. He wrote the letter to the Undersecretary of Defense, I think it was. And he said, we would like to move the OSAP program. He called it the ATIP program. He used an unclassified term. We want to move it into the black world. We want to make it a special access program, which means we want to hide the program. If that had been successful, OSAP would have been in the black world with all the other black world programs under very high security, and nobody would ever have heard of it because it didn't get in there. And once he put that letter out, the guys in the black world who are running the real program, he's just running another program. And the black world people say, what's this Reed thing? What does this guy think he's doing? He's going to start another UFO program and he wants our money and he wants our research. Get rid of that program. And they killed the program. The same as this Conan Blue. When the OSAP program was killed, Lakatsky and company went to the Homeland Security and they gave this briefing. that scared the living daylights out of these Homeland Security guys that couldn't sleep at night. That same night, the kid gets bombarded with the orbs, and they have this thing. They're trying to raise money with Homeland Security, so they get this program under Homeland Security called Conan Blue. And again, as soon as they knock on the door of the black budget guys say, "Get rid of that program, kill it," and it was killed right away. And that's what they do. There's one program that's under legal authorization, and all these other people think they can get in, they can get the money, they can get the ideas from the black budget program. The black budget program guys are running the show. They've been running the show the whole time, and they aren't about to let anybody in on the money and on the research.
Couple of things you mentioned, the UFO sky pilots. If people want to hear more about that, Grant, our last interview was all about that book and that topic, and you shared stories from it. Folks, go back and listen to that. It was really, really interesting. I've had Jim Semivan on about a year or so ago. Go back and check that one out, folks. Really popular. And he's just done an interview with James Iandoli over at Engaging the Phenomena. I'll put the link in the description, folks, to check that one out as well. Grant, and talking about these like secrets, okay, so you address, again, it was in the introduction of the book, to be honest, so I'm not even giving much away. And I found this really interesting, that a lot of folks in the UFO community themselves keep their fair share of secrets involving this topic. And that's very fair. And that seems to be something that goes against disclosure and transparency. So is it fair that if we're accepting of journalists, researchers, intel officials, documentary makers, and the like, keeping secrets in the name of progress and trying to get disclosure, that we should also accept there are those involved in the cover-up who could have equally valid reasons?
Yeah, I actually brought this up with James Iandoli because he heard that I had the study on President Johnson. So he says, "Can I get a copy?" I said, "Yeah, okay, you can get a copy. In exchange, you tell me about your experience." Where he has this experience where he's hearing music. He's in one-to-one with this being of light, and he's hearing music. And I'm writing another book that's going to deal with all the connections to all the different paranormal phenomena. And music is an important thing. People, if you hear it in the near-death experience, where you have got no ears. So how are you hearing music? It's this whole thing about what's really going on here. And I said to James, I said, "Am I the only guy that leaks documents into the UFO community? Like, what's going on?" I leaked the Wilson leak document. I leaked the Johnson study document, the alien autopsy document, the Douglas aircraft documents. I leaked those. And I said, like, nobody else is leaking anything. And it's the whole deal is you have this, what they call it sometimes the cosmic club or the invisible college or whatever. And these guys are all saying, well, you know, we don't want to say we're academics working on this stuff, and they're all exchanging information, or they have the aviary program or whatever, and everybody's in it for themselves. They're all gathering material so that they can get patents and they can get inventions. And one of the stories was that Hal Puthoff was, I don't know if you probably heard this story. Hal Puthoff was confronted by another researcher, a very prime researcher who everybody can sort of figure out who it is. But he says to Hal Puthoff, he says, "Hey, Hal, could you name the 12 guys who are running the program?" And Hal says, "Yeah, I could probably do that." And then he says, "Well, why didn't you do it?" He says, "Well, because you'd go to the New York Times, they'd write an article, I'd have to deny it, and then everybody would stop talking to me." And that's what it's all about. If you're at the level of, say, Hal Puthoff or Eric Davis or Gary Nolan, what you're trying to do, or George Knapp, you're trying to get people above you to talk to you. You're trying to get the material, and then when you get it, you make these agreements with people. I'll keep your name secret in exchange for the information. So it's like everybody's collecting stamps and everybody's gathering this material, and there's nobody covering. I was, one of the most disappointing moments of my life was when I suddenly realized how many people in the UFO community had the Wilson leak document, and they sat on this document for 10 years, and they had, and they didn't say anything. And it was the whole thing. It's like, what do I got to leak all this stuff to people? And it's very frustrating, but I can see what they're doing. It's like, and that's the whole idea behind this idea that if you're in the program, whether you're a government guy wanting to build weapons or whether you're a scientist wanting to develop a patent. I tell the story. I had this encounter with Tim Taylor. So Tim Taylor is this high-level engineer out of NASA, and I had the encounter with him, and he told me about the day he got the invention. And this is the invention that sort of started him off. He's got 40, and he believes that the beings are giving him this medical stuff. And he talked about the being, the hooded figure standing at the end of the bed. He said that the morning I woke up that idea, the last thing I remember the night before was a hooded figure standing at the end of the bed. And of course I said, "Well, could you see its face?" He said, "No, I couldn't see its face." And so he has this invention, And then that invention was part of a company. Now, how much the invention was of the company, but the company was sold for $100 million on NASDAQ. So there's a lot of money involved, especially if you've got biological material and stuff like this. And everybody's trying to patent it. The same as when you had psychedelics. So you get psilocybin, which is a natural project, say a thing you can't patent it, but everybody's patenting anything that's even close to psilocybin or LSD and stuff like that in anticipation for the fact that if it all of a sudden becomes legal, you've got this stuff and you control it. It's the whole thing of this giving the crafts to the contractors. People complain, oh, we give this to the contractors and then they keep it secret. Well, yeah, if you're Jimmy Carter or you're Ronald Reagan, you're a governor, like if you get a craft, like what are you going to do? You're a lawyer, you're a governor, like you know nothing about crafts. So you give the crafts to Lockheed or to Boeing or whoever you give the crafts to and say, can you figure this thing out? And they say, well, okay. So they work on it and they spend millions and millions of dollars. And then you go back with the Schumer Amendment and say, oh, now you got to give it all back to us and make it public. And they go, no, we're not doing that. No, we've got this invested. So everybody's got this invested interest, whether it's trying to get information above them. And if you leak something, everybody's going to know. It was called to me because the reason these guys stopped talking to me many years ago was because Cameron can't keep his mouth shut. And what I was told is basically the one said, you can't keep your mouth shut. Now I got to wait for what they call intelligence blowback, whether I'm going to lose my job or whether I'm going to lose my security clearance or whatever. And that's what they're all afraid of. If you leak something that the guy above you hear Lou Elizondo all the time say, oh, I can't go there. I can't talk about that. Well, that means somebody's listening to him. Somebody's above him who's watching exactly what he's saying, and they don't step over the line. Same as in the last interview that Semivan did. Semivan talks about Gresh, and he says, if you see what Gresh is doing, he has talked to the Inspector General, he has talked to Congress, but he's not saying anything public because he knows how the game is played. If you step over the line, you're going to jail. And so you can do this whole thing, and they all know the game. It's like there's stuff you can have and stuff you can't, and you have to have the proper security clearance, and that's the game. It's like almost like your mother must have told you at some point in your life, Andy, you made your bed, now lie in it. So we've got this $900 billion defense budget, and you're going to have to live with it because Eisenhower warned in 1961 in his final speech. He said, beware the military-industrial congressional complex. And he took the word congressional out as to not offend Congress, but he is beware the military-industrial congressional complex. That's what we've got. We've got everybody with a vested interest. It's the same as the F-35 jet fighter made by Lockheed. It's made in 47 different states. The reason it's made in 47 different states is because if they suddenly overrun by 100%, nobody's going to vote against it. Nobody's going to stop them because everybody's got jobs. Everybody's getting funding from them. Everybody's wrapped into this whole thing. And now we got to learn to live with this world that we've built with, where the security is legal. Even if you go to the Schumer Amendment, people say, no, it's not legal. Yes, it is legal. If you take the Schumer Amendment, what happened with the Schumer Amendment, the Rounds Schumer Amendment, it passed the Senate, but it has to pass the House. So in the Senate, it cleared 18-0 in the Intelligence Committee. Then it goes to the House, and there's three guys, the three mics, that block this thing. And they said, we're blocking the thing, and it doesn't really mean why they're blocking it. And they had to rewrite the bill. So when they went into this committee and they rewrote the bill, it said, you can keep the crafts. There's no subpoena power to make people testify, and you don't have to release the top secret documents to the public. So that was signed by the House, it was signed by the Senate, and it was signed by the President of the United States, which means it is legal. The way the law is set up, and people say, no, it's not legal. It is legal. That was actually signed into law. And that's the problem you have, is once you get into this world where everybody's an enemy and everybody's fearful, and you've got all these guns and you've got all these weapons and everybody's scared, you build it into the system that you have all these rights for these people to keep this stuff secret and levels of secrecy on top of levels of secrecy and levels of secrecy. And then you got the UFO people who are trying to figure it out, and they're building the same sort of levels of secrecy where they're swearing people to secrecy and they're telling stuff, which is the worst thing you can do. If someone comes to you and says, I will give you some material, and that's what they did. I think they did it even to Danny Sheehan. They gave material to Danny Sheehan, and he's been shut up. Because then they gave him material, and then he went public, especially with the one about the craft being bigger on the inside than outside. And now Danny Sheehan said that they told him if he wants to be part of the game, he's got to stop talking. because of attorney-client privilege. Well, he should at least be charging them if this whole deal. And that's the thing, is they can silence you, and now you got to be quiet, and nobody's saying anything, and the game gets played as it always has been, where the people who have the power are the people who have the secrets, and they're not about to give out the secrets. They think they're, as Eric Walker. Walker said to us at one point, he said, "What's the problem?" He said, "Nobody's blown up the world yet. What are you getting so concerned about?" And that's the way they see it. We're saving the world. We're doing the right thing, and they believe they're actually doing the right thing, and they don't really care what you think. Walker said to us, "Why should we?" And nobody's ever answered the question for me. Walker said, "Why should we change the rules and the regulations to satisfy your curiosity? You are just curious. Admit it." And that's true. 99.9% of people are just curious. They just want to know. They don't. You say, when the dog catches the car, when you figure that, Walker said to us, when you figure this thing out, what are you going to do with it? And nobody has an answer. It's like, oh, well, then I'll know. It's like, well, we're not going to give up $900 billion, or Lockheed shareholders. I think it's $463 for a Lockheed share. Nobody's going to say, okay, I'll burn my Lockheed shares and we're going to get disclosure. No, the bottom line is we want more profit. And so everybody's playing the game for themselves, and that involves secrecy, and that involves holding stuff and not giving it to people for nothing. And we're in this quagmire that I don't know how you're going to get out of.
It certainly seems we're stuck in a bit of a loop. When you say Danny Sheehan's not been talking, I spoke to him last week on an interview. I don't know if you've had the chance to catch that, Grant.
No, not yet.
But he mentioned the Golden Domes project from the CIA, where basically he said they've got this technology where they can literally track UAP, UFOs when they're cloaked. He was talking about that. So Danny wasn't too bad last week. He was still talking. But I completely agree where you come from, that he has clients and folks coming forward, and we talked about that. He can't just come out and say, yeah, I'm speaking to this guy on this program and he's doing this, because like you say, that person then goes away. That person,
but he got himself, he walked himself into that one. That was the whole thing, is you never ever exchange secrecy for silence.
Yeah.
It's like Danny always said, I'll never sign a non-disclosure agreement, but he has a client attorney privilege, secrecy. And they've used that against him, I think, in terms of, you got to keep quiet. So when are they actually going to say it? So it's like, once the Senate actually passes this thing, then you can talk, because he's sort of working with the Senate. But the problem is they're never going to pass it. So now you have this new bill being written up by the Senate, which basically is the Schumer-Rounds amendment, the same language, and they're going to pass it back. And there's no way it's going to pass. It has to pass the House. And Rogers and Turner and Johnson are going to kill it, the same as they did before. You're not going to pass it through here. And that's what I said. People say, well, there's the Illuminati. And as I say, forget the stupid Illuminati and the deep state and stuff like this. It's one simple thing. If there had been 6 more Democrats elected to the House of Representatives in the United States, there would be disclosure today. It would all be unfolding. End of story. The only reason that it didn't pass, and with the panel, the 9-person panel under the president that could subpoena people and force them to testify, giving the stuff back, the only reason is these guys blocked it. And as long as these guys own power in the House, it is not going to pass the House. You can write all the legislation you want in the Senate. It has to pass the House, and these guys have blocked it, and they're going to block it again, because they believe, whatever their reason for blocking it is, they're in favor of corporations. They're you can't tell the corporations what to do. They've spent money, whatever the excuse is. These guys are going to block it again, and you have to have the House and the Senate and the president. All you've got now is the president and the Senate. The House is going to continue to block it unless the Democrats take over, or these 3 guys go, and so that you'll have guys like Tim Burchett. He's whining and complaining about the deep state and the Illuminati. It's like, no, get off your fat rear end, sign a bill, and get your buddies, because the deep state is those 3 guys. There's no deep state. There's 3 guys that are blocking the bill. And so instead of complaining about the deep state or whoever he's complaining about, he gets his 3 buddies to pass the bill, and let's get it going. But to say, well, my guys can do what they want, but then he's scared, because you heard what he said. When he first came forward on UFOs, he said that Turner went into his district in Tennessee and started looking for a rich guy to primary him, to get him out, because he was trying to block this sort of thing. So that's the whole thing, is they do a Liz Cheney on you. If you decide you're going to be UFO and your party decides, no, there's no UFO, you're gone. They can get rid of you. And that's the problem we got is three guys. It's end of story. There's three guys. The deep state are the three mics in the House of Representatives who are blocking UFO disclosure. If they're gone, if they lose power, we might get disclosure. Until then, you're just urinating into the wind. Nothing's going to happen because these guys have power to block everything that they don't like, because they get, especially Johnson, because Johnson's the party leader. So once they get Johnson on board, then if there's ever a vote, it's a party line vote. You got to, and they've got the majority, so you have to vote. You have no choice. You can't say, "Oh, I favor UFO, I'm going to vote against it." It's a party line vote. If you don't vote on the party, we're getting you out of here. We're going to, next primary, you're gone. Your job is gone.
Grant, do you ever follow D. Dean Johnson on Twitter? He writes a lot of congressional stuff. He seems to be quite on the ball. He's always getting the language legislation when it's ready to launch. He basically had tweeted yesterday that in November, it was the, just checking, the gutting of the bill was not due to any lobbying campaign by powerful defense contractors, as some imagined, but to opposition from the Pentagon and AARO. And he quoted that it was the Pentagon's intelligence office that advised congressional negotiators on how to revise the UAP Disclosure Act at the time. I just wondered if you'd read that.
No, but that makes sense. That's what I'm saying, is these guys are listening to somebody, whatever their reason for blocking it is, whether they got friends in the Pentagon or they're getting funding. The funding doesn't make sense, because if you go to Lockheed and you look at, there's actually a page that they have of congressmen and senators that they fund. And the list is everybody. They give money to everybody. And that's the whole deal. It's the same as the Lockheed, the F-35 jet fighter being made in every state. It's the same thing. So wherever the pressure is coming from, they believe they're saving the world, but they blocked it. And that's the whole thing, is if you get these three guys out of the way, everybody else was in favor of it. And they're all claiming, like Luna and Burchett, and they're claiming, oh, we're in favor of this. We want to get this out. Well, then you know where the roadblock is. The roadblock is not the Pentagon. If they pass it, if these three guys pass it, doesn't matter what the Pentagon says. I mean, their whole argument in the House is we control the funding. They actually went to the Secretary of Defense, and they made them $1 a year. We're taking your pension, your money away, and you're only going to get paid $1 a year. They do this kind of stuff because they control the funding, so they can cut off the funding to the Pentagon. They say, you don't like it, we're cutting your funding off. End of story. The House runs the money, and that's the whole deal. So the Pentagon can say they take credit for this, whatever. But if the House decides, and I say, if these three guys had not been there, if there had been 6 more Democrats, it wouldn't matter what deep state said or the Pentagon said. This is the law. This is the new law. And that's what people got to realize, is law is written by the Congress. It's not written by the president. It's not written by the Supreme Court. It's written by the House of Representatives and the Senate, and whatever they have is law, which means you can basically, you're out of here. It's the same as when I was brought in on the Trump briefing. One of the big Trump funders came to me and said, "Oh, we got to tell the president. We're gonna have a briefing for Reince Priebus when Trump comes in." And I said, "And so why?" He said, "Well, because they're not going to tell him." I said, "What do you mean they're not going to tell him?" He said, "Well, they're not going to tell him." I said, "Well, who's the they?" And he said, "Well, the CIA and the Pentagon and stuff." I said, "Well, hey, number one, he's the president. He puts his brother-in-law. I mean, it's the point. Now he's going to say he's put MAGA in all the different jobs. He can replace anybody. You're fired. You're CIA. You're fired. NSA. You're fired. I'm putting my buddy in here, and you can put whoever you want. So if you put all your friends and relatives in the Pentagon and replace all the generals at the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the CIA director and NSA director, and you put all your guys, and then if they don't tell you, whose fault is that? I mean, you can't say that. I mean, he's in charge of the whole thing. He can put whoever he wants in there. So it's one thing to do it, and then to sort of blame somebody else for it. The dog ate the homework. I mean, ultimately, the president can have the power. But one of the things I forgot to mention, and I don't think it's in the book, Jim Semivan has brought up a new thing. I did the presidents for 3 decades, and I didn't know this existed. If you listen very carefully to what Jim Semivan saying, word by word, he talks about this presidential emergency or presidential executive action document. I didn't know such a thing existed, because if you go back to the MJ-12 document, which I talked about in the earlier disclosure books, I talked about Bill Moore's role with the MJ-12 document, and that was supposed to be executive order. So the president can write an executive order, but this executive action document, I didn't know existed. And Semivan said, I think that's what happened. And when Semivan says, I go, wow, maybe that if Semivan's saying that, Somebody told him that. And I didn't know these things existed. And basically he says the president has the power to actually just sit down and to write a document and say, this is going to be secret. Only certain people are going to be let in. And Jim Semivan said the president has this absolute power to do this, that he can do this. And nobody can. So that would mean that the program, the UFO program, is an executive order, is owned by the executive. And that Congress has no right to do anything because they don't own the program. That's where the block's going to be. But whether it's in the Congress or whether it's the Senate is funding all these black budget programs and stuff like that, you basically have the position to move it, but there's nobody wants to move it. Everybody's playing this game, and it's sort of a quagmire of you can't get anything done in the Congress anymore. Everything is being blocked. Everybody's fighting. You need 3/4 vote for overrun a veto and stuff like that, and nothing gets done. So that's the situation we're in, where the UFO program is in the same sort of situation where one guy can block it because they blocked the border, they blocked the Ukraine aid, they actually blocked the birth stuff and stuff like that. They can block whatever they want. I mean, it takes one guy. And then the UFO community really doesn't do anything, because that's what Walker said. Admit it, you're just curious. Why should we change the rules and regulations to satisfy your curiosity? So when these guys blocked it, there was a guy actually in Dayton. I don't know if you know this. There was a guy, an independent guy who was running in Dayton against Turner in this upcoming election. And he decided he was going to have a UFO disclosure event right in the front door of Congressman Turner's office. And it's right on the main drag in Dayton, Ohio. There's 10,000 cars an hour go past, and we're gonna have a rush hour on Friday. And I gave him an interview. Sean Hazlitt gave him an interview. But other than that, the UFO community didn't do anything to support this guy. So he had this thing. He spent hundreds of dollars, this huge banner. He had a big UFO disclosure banner. And on the Friday, 6 people showed up. On the Saturday, it was raining. 2 people showed up. He just shut it down. So that's the whole thing. So the UFO community talks big talk. Oh, we need this, we need that. But when it comes right down to doing something about it, there's nobody. And another example I can give you, this happened in the Bush administration. When Bush got elected, Bush was caught in an interview with a guy by the name of Charles Huffer. And he was caught in this interview where he said, we're going to do UFO disclosure. And then Cheney walks up and he says, this is the man. He knows what's going on. It's going to be the first thing he does when he gets to the White House. So when he got to the White House, I had my 15 seconds of fame. I phone in on this radio talk show. Dick Cheney takes my phone call and I say, hey, Mr. Cheney, in all your jobs in government as the chief of staff of Ford, of the Secretary of Defense for Bush Sr., and now you're the vice president, in all your jobs in government, have you ever been briefed on the subject of UFOs? If so, when was it and what were you told? And he said, if I had been briefed on that subject, it would probably be classified and I wouldn't be talking about it. So he cuts that off. But a woman by the name of Laura Johnson, who was a expert on demonstrations, she came from South Africa. She'd been arrested in front of the White House on different issues, always demonstrating and stuff like that, was in the United States. And she's heard all this controversy about the fact that Bush had promised to disclose and he wasn't doing it. So she said, okay, I'm gonna do a hunger strike. So she goes in front of Senator Feinstein's office in California, sits on the front step, and she starts a 42-day hunger strike. And she's going, and what happens? All these people are coming, UFO researchers are coming and saying, you're making us look bad. Stop it. What are you doing? You're crazy. And don't do this. And she's fighting it off, and she's going on radio talk shows and stuff. She became fairly popular. And she went for 42 days, and then suddenly she stopped the hunger strike. So I'm going to California to interview her as this happens. And I said to her, Laura, so why do you stop the hunger strike? And she said, because the UFO community oppressed me. They went after me. They couldn't care less if I died. So if they don't care if I die, why should I die for them? That's what she said. And it was like she stopped the hunger strike. And that's the whole thing, is the UFO community talks a big game, but when it comes right down to it, they really, really don't do much. And that's what Walker pointed out. He said, when you catch the car, what are you going to do? You're just curious. Admit it, you're just curious. And we're not going to change the rules for your curiosity. And that's exactly, supposedly, according to Danny Sheehan, what Bush Sr. told Jimmy Carter. When Jimmy Carter was doing the president-elect, he was getting the briefing from the former head of CIA. He said the UFO files, and he said, curiosity is not sufficient need to know. And that's what it comes down to. Just because you're curious doesn't mean we're going to tell you how the atomic bomb works, how many nuclear submarines, where our nuclear submarines are. You're just curious. We're not going to tell you that. It's national security. And the United States of America is into national security. It's the next 10 countries to combine. Their budget is just massive. And when you get this huge budget, and what they're doing now is they're doing this fear thing in Congress. So they're trying to, and this is the book 4, where I go into the whole thing, what happened in Congress. The book 4 goes into this whole thing where they say, it's another enemy. And we got to do something about this. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to move the budget from $900 billion to $1 trillion. Another $100 billion because we want to draft off it. And the UFO community has been famous the whole time because you can't make any money at UFOs. I remember John Rayo, who used to own UFO Congress. I was there and I was in his office. He said, Grant, I got a question for you. And he's a multimillionaire. He's a Canadian guy. And he said, how do you make any money at this thing? I said, I don't know. You don't make any money at this thing. And he quit. He basically shut down, sold UFO Congress and shut down all his research stuff for stuff. And that's the whole thing, is that there is no money. And so if you can get the Congress to believe that the aliens are here and they're gonna kill us all, rape the women, eat the children, then you're gonna get a lot of money. And everybody wants to draft, because all the research funds don't come from the public, they come from the government. The government is the main source of research funding. So what you want to do is called drafting off of research funding. So the money's there, and who's going to miss another $1 billion? So we get $1 billion to do the UFO thing. And the scientists that are working on it are going to get these patents that are worth billions of dollars. And we're going to have 5 houses instead of 3 houses, and 6 cars instead of 3 cars. And everybody's going to be richer and richer and richer. And this is how it works in the United States of America. It's all about money. It's about bottom line. It's how do we have a bigger, more powerful this, what, and I call it boys and their toys. And nobody's interested in the spiritual aspect, which is, I say, what it's basically going to come down to. This is going to be an ontological, spiritual kick in the balls for whoever is playing this game. I'll guarantee you this is going to be a spiritual thing when it comes right down to it. But we don't want it. It's when you talk to the experiencers, that it was like Laura Johnston. Nobody wanted to talk to her. You're making us look bad. And if you take a look in the UFO community, the new illegal refugees in the UFO community are the experiencers. Do not bring them up. Even Danny Sheehan, when he had the negotiations, the contractor said, do not bring up the abductions. Do not bring that up. They don't want to go down that angle, because that's when you got people who are actually interacting with the intelligence. Just talk technology, talk metals, talk this kind of stuff. Don't get into the experiencers. They're ostracized. If you take a look at the major documentaries that are done in the UFO community, they will not touch experiencers. The same as IONS, the group that looks at paranormal phenomena and psychic stuff. IONS will not touch UFOs. They actually said to Ray Hernandez, we can't touch it. We're on your side. But if we do UFOs, we're going to lose all our funding. And the same thing happens in the UFO community. If you talk experiencers, you're talking new age, you're talking spiritual nonsense. You're not going to get any funding. So documentary people will say, I can't go there. Just stick to the stories, the lights in the sky, the Nimitz, all the stuff that happened, Nimitz, the videos and stuff like that. And do not touch the people who are actually having the experiences and claim that they're interacting with whatever the intelligence is behind this phenomena.
Grant, I'll let you pause for a drink or a breath.
Yeah.
A lot to unpack there. I made some notes. The first thing, I'll just make a comment on the idea of the UFO community. The UFO community is a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I think there are some folks, and I'll preface this by saying this is my opinion, okay? People may disagree, and they're allowed to do that. But this idea that, for example, a lot of folks, I think, refer to the UFO community as the Twitter community, right? And
Yep.
if you have 10,000 followers, all 10,000 of those followers see everything you say all the time, and that there's this big revolving door of everyone reading your comments and replying. It's just not true. It's not how social media works. It just doesn't. And it's the UFO community is the same as when you refer to the US government, as the government are in charge. Well, the government's a big thing, and most of the government don't know about the other parts of the government and different offices and branches and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
That's like the UFO community. The UFO community is like a big, for me, hotel where you've got some people who stay there all year round, but not many. You've got folks there on business. You've got some folks there on pleasure. You've got some folks passing through, and you've got some folks who rent a room for the night. A lot of these times, these people don't interact, or they pass by each other and don't know who they are. So I think, like you say, when the UFO community doesn't come together for something, half the time you don't see the content or what people say. Half the time it just goes by, or it was planned. Because I remember the demonstration that you're talking about, if that was the right word, where only 6 people turned up. But again, in terms of planning, everyone able to travel, all that kind of stuff, it's difficult to put something together that's going to please everyone, because like you say, everyone has their own idea of what this should be, how this should work, what disclosure looks like, what progress looks like, what UFOs are. And I think that even ties into what you've said there in terms of experiencers, and that they're far down the rung of the ladder in terms of the conversation. And I had this conversation a while back online with J. Christopher King and a few others. I got on really well with those guys. But my point was, I can see why right now, in terms of the conversation being mainstream, the experiencer side of things tends to be left out. Because if I bring it down to, if I speak about this in work and I try to get someone from just a normal friend of mine who's got no interest in UFOs, and just for a minute they take that interest, I get my 15 seconds of fame with one of my friends in work talking about UFOs. The minute you start to go too off track in terms of, maybe they're not coming from other planets, maybe they're here already, or okay, you get their buy-in, they're going to listen to you, and then you start to mention abductions, maybe they're coming from different dimensions, you start to lose people. And I get why the conversation is relevant, but there's a time and a place for certain elements of the conversation, and that's not just experiencers. For me, that's any part of the UFO conversation. There's times and places for different parts of it. And I get why you can't just all throw it into the same melting pot at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, except that we're still going back to the thing where we're appeasing people to entertain them, because the UFO thing is just basically entertainment. That's why you get the situation where when you actually try to do something, there's nobody there. I'll give you another example I have. And this is this mentality of what's going on. I posted 2 things exactly the same time on Twitter. One was a discovery I made. It comes in a new book, a double book I'm writing called The Big Game. And that is, I find people across the spectrum who had this vision that everything is perfect. Everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be. One of them is the wife of Nick Cook, tells a story about the fact that her mother's dying, and as her mother dies, she has this shared near-death experience. She knows the answer to everything in the universe, and everything's perfect and stuff like that. I put that up. And at the same time, I put a quote up by Jim Semivan from his latest interview, where he says, I've talked to high-level officials who are in the know, who say the phenomena is indigestible. And that means nobody knows what's going on. So everybody immediately takes the negative view, like, oh, they're going to eat us. This is this terrible thing they're covering up and stuff like that. When I did the posting, the one about everything is perfect got no retweets. It got 1,800 views. Mm-hmm. The other one got 90 retweets. 120,000 people viewed it. It was like just viral. And that's this mentality that we have. It's just this entertainment thing where we're just putting stuff out. And when you come right down to it, there's no support for all this stuff. And the bottom line is going to be that this is going to be, and we got to start going to what the phenomena is doing. The phenomena is leading us down the road where, in the end, whether people like it or not, in the UFO community, I say a lot of the UFO community is going to be the ones fighting for the cyanide pills with the scientists, when they suddenly find out it's totally wrong. And there's actually contactees from years gone by who said, do not go down the technology route. It's a trap. And we're going down this trap. We're going in this thing where we're just sort of cycling weird stories about UFO sightings and stuff like that. And we're just, it's like an entertainment thing. It's not really getting us anywhere. We've done it for 80 years. We've done the UFO sightings. Even Lakatsky said all UFO sightings are different. Nobody paid attention to that. That is really significant. If all UFO sightings are different. And I actually went back after he said that. I said, hey, that's what happened. I went back and I looked, and sure enough, I had 36 people who'd flown the craft. Nobody touched the same thing. One person had a joystick, one had a button, one put their hands on a panel, one put their hands on a ball. And I'm going, what's the chances? It's this idea that it's this complex thing that has to do with consciousness, and whether people are ready for it or not, we're just sort of entertaining people, and we've done it for 80 years. It hasn't got us anywhere. And to me, it's like a total waste of time. We're just wasting everybody's time. And that's what Walker said. You're not getting anywhere with it. Leave it alone. It's just curiosity. And when it comes right down to it, in terms of fundraising or doing anything, everybody just sort of disappears because they're just, it's the old idea, like on the internet, or if you look it up, a two-year-old has an attention span of between 4 and 6 minutes. If you look at on the internet, look up at the attention span of somebody on the internet, it's 8 seconds. So people are flipping. You can see them going through Twitter. They're going. Nobody's paying attention. So when Lukatsky comes up and says every single sighting is different, nobody pays attention to him. When he says it's psychic phenomena is part of the equation, which is the key part, it's not just hardware. And the men in black are real, but they're dragging us into this thing. They're trying to drag us into this phenomena. And the fact that we've been inside the craft, and if you knew what was inside the craft, you'd realize that the rest of this is very primitive. The whole rest of the book is primitive. And they're dropping these sort of things. And it's just this very complex story that we've whittled down into sort of like an entertainment, getting Twitter, getting hits, getting podcast views, stuff like that, where we're just basically entertaining people, and we're never going to get anywhere. We're just doing making the same mistake over and over again. We've done this for years with the sighting stuff and the sort of the videos. And it's like I say to people, if the government knows, what difference does it make? So what? The government knows. What? Let's get past that already. It's real. Let's get on to what's actually going on. But everybody's still on, let's prove UFOs exist. Let's prove there's aliens. Let's prove this. And it's the same cycle over. And I've done it next year in May, it'll be 50 years. And I've just the same cycle over and over again. And we're not getting anywhere. We're just not getting anywhere.
So I'll disagree slightly with the generalization that everyone thinks it's entertainment, because I know if I say that, I'll get emails off of listeners and viewers saying, this is really serious to me. Abductees will get in touch and say they've had horrible experiences. But I get what you mean, that you're generalizing at that point. But how do we then get past that? Because Grant, you're spot on. You started your research in this in 1975. So you have been around. You started this 11 years before I was born. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you how things are, because you've seen this cycle before, like you say. And I hear that from other listeners who email me to say, I'm 60 years old, 70 years old, and I remember the cycle coming round that disclosure was going to happen. It goes away, it comes back, it goes away, it comes back. All we've got now is social media and podcasts in different formats to present that information, whereas at one point it was VHS tapes and newsletters and magazines and clubs, okay? So I totally appreciate that these things have happened. You've got 5 decades experience in this. How do we move on so next year you aren't celebrating 50 years saying the same thing?
Okay. Two things. The book number 4, the title of book number 4 is called Beyond Managing Magic, Landing the Plane. I got frustrated and I got a message, clear as day. It said, it's almost like, well, there's a psychedelic one that matches, but it said, don't worry. What are you getting so concerned about? Don't worry. We know how to land the plane. It's like, they're running. That's what Jim Semivan says. When he got the briefing, the story of John Alexander came to him and said, no, this is not for real. There's no program. He said, and Jim Semivan said, yes, there is a program. This is a program. It's all being run. And then, so John Alexander said, so who's running it? And Jim Semivan said, they are. They're running the show. They're unraveling. Because you got to remember, the UFO is covering up as well. They're playing this little game. They're pretending to be aliens. They're coming in. They're doing all this weird stuff. That's the whole thing. Like, when you're at the Nimitz, when it drops from 80,000 feet down to sea level, what are they doing? They're just showing off. They're just like, hey, make some bubbles under the water. Here they come. Make some bubbles. And the pilots go, oh my God, there's bubbles. And everybody's just retelling these stories. They're number one, the phenomena is running the story. The second thing is, if you go back to the beginning of quantum physics, Max Planck, who invented quantum physics, had the same problem we got. He couldn't get anywhere. Everybody's ridiculing him and saying stuff like this. He said, science does not advance by you convincing your opponent that you're right. Science advances when your opponent dies, one funeral at a time. And the new generation is not offended with the idea. So it really doesn't matter. We're going to go through this and it's all going to eventually unravel and it's all going to come out. And the phenomena is doing this sort of stuff. And I've seen repeatedly. The phenomena is changing. So like people will say, oh, it's extraterrestrial. I even had this discussion the other night. It's extraterrestrial, definitely extraterrestrial. I say, okay, so in 1896, when we discovered radioactivity and when we discovered the engine, when all these 10,000 sightings appeared, these people, the story was they came from Mars. Did these people actually come on wooden ships through the vacuum of time and space here to have these interactions? And it's like, if you think they came from Mars on wooden ships, you're insane. I mean, and so where did they go? There was 10,000 and suddenly they just disappeared. And then suddenly comes the Foo Fighters, which only lasted for a year and a half. And then where'd the Foo Fighters go? And then the green fireballs come when we're building the atomic weapons and the plutonium plants and stuff like that. Then the green fireballs appear. And then the Adamski crafts appear after we detonated the hydrogen bomb. A couple of days after we detonated the hydrogen bomb, suddenly Adamski has this encounter. And we have the contactees. Then they say they're from Mars and Venus. And I remember the Canadian guy, the Canadian government, the metallurgist for the Canadian government program told me, he said, the story was that AFA, who the Canadian government dealt with and the CIA dealt with and Navy intelligence dealt with, they were all dealing with this alien. And he said he was from Uranus, which is like 320 degrees below zero Celsius. And there was half a billion people on Uranus. And that's where he came from. And he said, look, Grant, let me make something very clear to you. Seriously clear. At no time did Wilbur Smith and I ever believe that AFA was from Uranus? And then suddenly you got the cattle mutilations start, then the cattle mutilations fade out, then the crop circles started, and then the crop circles fade out, and then it goes even to the ground traces. Stanton Friedman said, oh, we got these ground traces. There's 4,000. We got this physical evidence. I wrote, and I made this letter public. Ted Phillips, who was the king of ground traces. He was the main guy. I wrote him already in 2001. I said, hey, Ted, have I got it wrong or have ground traces stopped? He said, well, yeah, not totally stopped. He said, yeah, but we used to have 2 a day. There has not been one in 2021, not a single one. And that's the whole deal. As the phenomena is going through this phenomena, they do this, and they do this, and they change it to this, they change it to that. And this game, and they're moving us down the road, but they're not disclosing. They're doing the same thing. They're doing the confirmation without the disclosure. And so eventually it's all going to work out. So it's the whole idea that everything's in the field, and certain people can get in the field and get the answers. Same with near-death experiences. 31% of people in near-death experience say they knew the answer to everything in the universe at one point during their experience. UFOs, it's 40%. I've had that experience of knowing everything in the universe and having it pulled back and stuff like that. So this is all going to unravel in due time. It's what do we do with what we've got, our role in the thing. It really doesn't matter. It's like I say to the people, what difference does it make if the government knows? So what the government knows? Like, what are you gonna do? My kid lives in Vancouver. It's like $6,000 for a mortgage a month. I mean, my kid's had a UFO experience. He talked to my dead father. He could care less. I got to pay my bills. And that's the whole thing. Is this thing is we overestimate how powerful we are. We don't realize that if you get a couple thousand people, or if you get at the MUFON conference, you get 600 people out of 8 billion people. There are not that many people who are into UFOs. Everybody's into their own little life, and the phenomena is moving along, and it's great, gradually unraveling itself. And they, as Jim Simonvan said, they're running the show. The UFO phenomena is running the show.
I can already tell we've got lots to get through still. So moving on slightly, and we'll keep coming back to the book, but you've touched on the next book already. So it's a work in progress, and you feel the conversation, the book series is matching the evolution of the UFO conversation, the phenomenon running the show. It's not a case of the government's going to come out tomorrow and tell us all the truth. This is going to happen on their terms, whatever they may be. But a few things that are going to happen. So we've already touched on the UAP Disclosure Act, Schumer Rounds Amendment 2.0, and what may or may not happen there. A few things that are due to happen this year, to get your thoughts on them, Grant. Lou Elizondo's book is due to release in a couple of weeks as we speak. Have you got any thoughts on what your expectations are from Lou Elizondo's book imminent?
There's supposedly a leak. I saw this thing about the leak, and the people who said they'd read it said nothing new. He can't step over the line. I think he said what he's going to say. He's going to, put it all in one book or whatever. And it's going to be a powerful book in terms of his experience and the fact that, he ran the program, and he saw some very serious stuff. But if it's going to get into, was he in a facility where there was a craft? Did he actually see a craft in a facility? He ain't going there. He can't go there. He's going to go to jail. It's crossing that line. So I don't think that'll, again, it sort of raises all the boats. It's the same thing. It's more and more and more, almost like the acclimatization thing. In 2009, I wrote an article called 64 Reasons They Decided Not to Tell You the Truth. And I went in the whole Stephen Greer thing, that the stock market would melt down when everybody decides oil is not worth anything. Religious people are going to jump off of bridges, all these things about why the government's withholding the secret. And basically, they were doing the acclimatization thing. And so when the 2017 story breaks in the New York Times, what happened? Did anybody jump off a bridge? Did anybody panic? No, everybody went, yeah, I knew that already. And that's the whole thing. It's more acclimatization. It's more raising the bar where the government can, the people inside the government can be more open about the fact that, yeah, like Obama, yeah, we have videos. We really didn't know what it was. Or Podesta saying, yeah, we look for the secret, but it's a big $600 billion budget at that time. And there's lots of places to hide this stuff. So you get these sort of admissions by people, and it's all raising the issue, but it's still the same thing. UFOs exist. And when I had my first sighting, there was no doubt when I had my first sighting, what happened. Looking back at the time, I didn't realize it, but it was in so close. And it was moving so weird and so slow in front of the car as it came by that they wanted me to be absolutely assured. This is not a star. This is not a plane. This is not, they wanted me to get onto the fact that this is for real. I was raised very religious. I was supposed to be a minister. And I'm thinking like, oh my God, miracles do happen. It's like, oh, I couldn't believe it. And then the second day it came right at me. And then it flew around and I'm going, and then it was just flying away. I'm going, well, what's it doing? And what it was doing, it was sort of dragging me in. And that's, I think, what we're having is this acclimatization where there's more and more in the water. And the young kids, you can go to the young kids. The old people are going to die off, the people who are against this. And the young generation is going to come along and say, yeah, it's for real. The government's got the stuff and all this sort of stuff. The problem we have, the blockade, is in the money situation where the people who control the secrets may say, yeah, we've got the secrets, but we're not going to release them to you. We're not going to give you the technology because we spent money on it. That's where the roadblock is. So we are eventually going to be moving along. But the Schumer rounds 2.2, that's why I say that's a total waste of time. You can write all the bills you want in the Senate. And I hate to be the Canadian who's telling the Americans how to run the government, how the government runs, but you need it to pass in the House. It's not going to pass the House as long as these three guys are in power. It's just not going to pass. You can do 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, all these 0.0s you want. It's not going to pass until you get these guys out of power. They control it and they can block the bill, and it's not going. You're not going to move down the road, but you're going to have more acclimatization. You're going to have more guys like Grush coming forward, more stories and stuff like that. It's just gradually people are going to be accepting the fact this is for real. But it's another story to get the fact that it's for real, and then get the military industrial congressional complex who's running the show and is not about to shut down a $900 billion defense budget and go get an honest day's job. They're not going to shut it down. There's no way.
You mentioned David Grush. Yeah. There is a long rumored op-ed from David Grush to come, apparently, allegedly, coming soon, as some would say. Do you think we're going to get that? And again, for you, is that just further acclimatization for people to this topic? Because David Grush did have a sizable impact on the UFO conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But again, as Semivan pointed out, watch carefully. Semivan said, watch carefully what David Grush did. He went to the Inspector General. He made some noise. He made noise. He went to the Senate. He told that stuff, but he doesn't step across the line because he knows how the game is played. He's a smart guy. He's got all the clearances, and he knows you cannot release classified information. It's against the law. They put you in jail for that. The one girl in Georgia, they had her in the first day. She released one document. She ended up in jail for five years with one document. They had her within hours. They know when stuff is being leaked. And so this continuation of semi stuff that's been altered. In fact, there's book 5 is the drip thing, where it's like I got involved in a program where suddenly they came forward. It's like Tom DeLonge. Oh, we're going to do it again. It's like I'm talking to this guy. What? They're what? They're gonna put you in contact, and it's like we're from the government. We're here to help you. This is what it basically came down to. I go, oh my goodness, they're doing it again. I said, and so I'm advising this guy. I'm saying, be careful, watch out. They can't go classified material. And he said, did they give me a classified document? I said, they didn't give you they can't give you a classified document. And I'm trying to explain to these people how it works. And so the 5 books of UFO disclosure, I tell people, don't even read it. It drives me nuts that I have to write these disclosure books, but I get dragged into this thing as well. Plus I wrote the Carter book and I wrote the Clinton book. So I've written 7 books on this disclosure thing of the government, what they're doing and stuff. But to me, it's like, it just gives me a headache. I hate it. I want to go to the consciousness thing. I want to go to the whole thing about what's really going on. What are we dealing with? What is this phenomenon and stuff like that? And I keep getting dragged back into this. It's like a circus. It's like you get all the, and as I said on Twitter, you can put 1 on the consciousness and you'll get nothing, no retweets. And you put the thing that's on the disclosure stuff and it just goes viral. 120,000 people viewed. It's like, holy cow. And that's basically what happens. And if you've been to UFO Consciousness Life Expo. So this is supposed to be a consciousness conference. It's got 20, 30,000 people at it. In LA, you've got a Spanish section and whatever. And you go there and I give my consciousness lecture, and Ray Hernandez complained about the same thing. You go in and you talk about what's really going on, about what's this thing behind the phenomena, and you get like 35 people. And then across the hall, you get the Blue Avian thing, and they got 600 people, and there's 150 people standing in the hallway with $80 tickets, and they're furious because they didn't get in the room, and they oversold the tickets, and it's like a viral circus. And then you go like, this is just, you just almost want to give up. It's like, holy cow, the message isn't there. People are into the entertainment, they're into the stuff, and I know from the way I post, and when you post the sort of the disclosure stuff, everybody goes viral, and everybody goes, when you post the other stuff, nobody pays any attention. They just ignore it.
Well, hopefully people won't ignore this one, Grant, and I'm sure they won't, but we'll call this the end of part 1. And I'm going to move on to part 2, where I've got listener questions for you, if you're good with that, to finish off.
Yeah.
So thank you to everyone who's listened to the first part. If you're paying for the podcast, you get it in full. I'm going to get this straight out after Grant's given me his time tonight for everyone, and then it'll be up on the free feeds in the next day or so as well, plus YouTube, all that stuff. But Grant's always good for his time, so we're going to crack straight on and get into listener questions. Grant, so that is all for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. Apple and Spotify do make a huge difference to the algorithm. If you're checking the show out on YouTube, please don't forget to like and leave a comment on here as well. Any sharing you do is very much appreciated on any social media platform. And finally, you can listen to shows ad-free and sponsor-free in their glorious full versions by subscribing for less than the price of a coffee on Apple. Spotify, just search That UFO Podcast Premium. YouTube, you can sign up and be a member, or you can do that through patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, folks.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue.